Hello, everybody. Welcome to Parallax Podcasts. I'm here with Max Borders, who is doing a course for us beginning March 10th. And it's a very audacious project, even ambitious project. It's called The Gray Robes Initiation into a Global Digital Priesthood. I know you're the author of several books, and the Social Singularity in 2018, the Decentralists, and another book called Underthrow. So I know you're prolific, and I know you're on fire, and I know you have a lot of wonderful ideas. So I want to, and that's why we invited you to do a course. But I want you to kind of maybe lay out this concept for the course. And maybe we can talk a little bit in more detail about the details of the course, like the concept of the gray robes and what is a digital priesthood. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's start then with that idea of what is the gray robes all about? I think a lot of people are wanting to know. I think it's piqued their curiosity, certainly. And I can reveal what it symbolizes to me, and maybe it will resonate with your folks as well. Really, if you think about, let's go back to 2014. This fellow named Scott Alexander, which is a pseudonymous name for a writer who's really made the rounds in quite an amazing way. I think he's a psychologist or psychiatrist, one or the other, but otherwise has done writing on the side for Astral Codex 10 and I forgot the other acronym, or no, what is it called? Anyway, where you mix up the letters.
I couldn't help you with that.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Well, he's really quite a famous writer. He at least stateside, and I think internationally as well.
Mm-hmm.
In 2014, coined this term, the Gray Tribe, and the Gray Tribe is neither red nor blue, which, forgive the sort of American navel gazing, actually works in Europe quite well to a great degree. At least in Britain, where they have blue and red designations. They happen to be flipped in the United States. Suffice it to say, it symbolizes sort of partisan duality of conservatives versus progressives, essentially.
Yeah. And is that a reference to the Matrix and the red pill and the blue pill as well? I mean, I think the red and the blue symbolism is quite universal in many ways, red being a fiery color of revolution and blue being more of, a stable color or a color of traditionalism.
Right. Well, and that's why it was odd, because what it also appealed to was the colors in the U.S. flag. So what you began to see in election seasons over time was every election season, these news organizations started symbolizing the major two parties in the United States with red and blue. And so that became sort of a mental mapping. Now, it makes less sense in the sense that traditionally we've understood red as being associated with more left or more socialist, and blue being more associated with conservatism. But that got flipped at some point, just by virtue of one election season when one of the news organizations made it so. Mm-hmm. And this kind of got picked up and became a meme, red team and blue team. So the red tribe, blue tribe trope has been around as a partisan metaphor for a while. But in 2014, Scott Alexander came out with sort of identified a new tribe. He called it the Gray Tribe. Mm-hmm. And that's the background story of that. Now, what the Gray Tribe symbolizes, we can talk about in a moment.
Yeah. Well, just about the red and the blue, first of all, is it would seem that, the Republicans are red, which seems like an inversion to me
It
The
does.
Trump
Yeah.
is sort of, a revolutionary where he's actually saying build a wall, which is more of normally a conservative. Like in France, where I live, Marie Le Pen, they're called les Bleus, like the Blues.
Hmm.
And they want to bring back, they want to build a wall and keep immigrants out and go back to the way things were. And so it is a real inversion, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's quite unfortunate because it doesn't play to those older tropes about, red socialist and blue conservatives. But that's okay. It is what it is, and I guess we have to accept it. People know what you mean in the United States, and certainly elsewhere. Forgive the my. It's not meant to be jingoistic or anything. It's just acknowledging what it is. But
Mm-hmm.
you can imagine it flipping it for your own purposes. The point is that kind of that fundamental duality that even
Yeah.
plays out in parliamentary systems.
Yeah.
The Gray Tribe came along and was identified by Scott Alexander, and really what he was getting at with this is we are neither nor.
Right. Yeah.
Our we and you have to keep in mind this is after a couple of key pivotal events in the years leading up to that. I think the first
Mm-hmm.
was um, the when the Bitcoin white paper came out, and that was October 31st, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was a massive that is neither nor. That is not left nor right. It is a if you look orthogonally to left and right, it is, you might call it, more liberal to more authoritarian, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is
Mm-hmm.
ultra liberal. It is to say, to get the intercession of central authorities out of the way through
Yeah.
technological means. And this had a quite a broad appeal to some of the people in Silicon Valley who were didn't really identify with sort of the red the red tribe had become more and more populist even before Trump, and a little, were perceived as just spit sawdust liking football, what, lowbrow, what the working class is associated with, and
Yeah.
and
The
the elites said
deplorables. Yeah.
they're the deplorables, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
the the elites saw themselves as, oh, technocratic and educated, and so allowed to plan and design society for the rest of those. And how could they resist our charms and our promises when we're only trying to help them? That kind
Mm-hmm.
of attitude. So
Very
it
patronizing.
be,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it became a kind of baser anti-elitism in the zeitgeist
Mm-hmm.
versus this technocratic elitism tinged with, of course, this radical social justice, the social justice fundamentalism, if you like. And
Mm-hmm.
so the Grays came along, and the Bitcoin white paper was it's we kind of you might say it has a flavor of libertarianism, the old liberalism of the American founding, but it is
Mm-hmm.
much more tech forward. It's the old liberalism of the American founding plus this idea of we can radically innovate everything in terms of social change. So it abandons conservatism on the one hand and technocracy on the other hand, this sort of left-wing technocracy,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and stakes out its own territory. The Gray Tribe was born now.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to riff on that a little bit. And
Yeah.
that's really the point of sort of appropriating that as a brand. And I've done that with my shirt today.
Yeah. So, I mean, just a few things that come to mind as you're speaking. Of course, it seems to me when you have this, I thought of the term that John Vervaeke uses, two worlds mythology, which he applies kind of to religion, but we could easily, apply this to politics as well. There's two sides, right? And then there's a movement of these two sides being in this dialectical kind of like, war with each other all the time.
Mm-hmm.
and then the two sides flip. And it seems like the two sides flip, and it seems like the conservatives are now the radicals, and the radicals are now, the technocrats, or at least the progressives are now the most conservative, and the you know and suddenly the conservatives become, radical in some kind of a way, and then so everything seems to be like the upside down clown world. And then everybody's looking for this in between. And I mean, I've always felt kind of on the in between, that I didn't want to take a side, or I didn't want to be part of any kind of unidimensional or monological, you ideology. So I guess I'm a gray. um,
Yeah, I think a lot of people see themselves that way, but haven't quite
So maybe that's
articulated
what's
it.
nice and radical about your concept, and appropriate, and why it should be spread.
Well, and there's a couple more tropes embedded in the color gray that I want to share with your audience. One is the idea of, if you recall from that great hero's journey story of the Lord of the Rings, right?
Mm.
Or the Hobbit, either one. They have the monomyth, I think, embedded in both. The idea is that you have the wise counsel of Gandalf the Grey,
Yeah.
and Gandalf the Grey, as a trope, is warning against wearing the Ring of Power. The Ring of Power is a symbol of radical centralization.
Hmm.
Power is just too tempting. It goes all the way back to the Ring of Gyges story, which is in ancient Greek mythology, even prior to, it was written about and referred to in the Plato's dialogues. So there's this really interesting dialogue between, I think it's Socrates and someone else, and I think Socrates actually loses that dialogue to some degree. But I don't want to speak out of turn and misremember. Suffice it to say, the Ring of Gyges is a ring of invisibility that confers the power to act with impunity. And of course, political power gives people an opportunity to act with impunity as well if there aren't sufficient checks. So we are seeing the rapid advance of this technocratic managerial regime that is making a lot of people feel uncomfortable. And the left in North America, whether that be the red team in Canada of Trudeau, or it's been profoundly embraced on the left, but they also don't want to embrace this, as I said, populism of the right, which is a strange turn of events as well.
Hmm.
So you get this, you're getting this unholy alliance between business and government that is super powerful. The corporatist state. It is evolved. I hate to use the F word, but it's evolved fascism. It's not a conscientious fascism like Benito Mussolini said. It is this coital arrangement between business and government that was bound to happen. That
Mm.
and so the Greys are really not into this. They see this coming. And we imagine Klaus Schwab, back in the shadows, inviting all these business leaders and all these government leaders into his dialectic den there in Davos. And we're like, holy shit, this is the kind of stuff that's going on all the time. This is just making it into a parade, but this is the kind of stuff that's happening all the time. And more power is being taken away from the people. So it's
Hmm.
no wonder that there's a popular response to that. The problem is the populists tend to want to just think in terms of commandeering the wheels of power, of wearing the ring as well, that they're
Yeah.
going to install the right kind of person at
So
the
we have
highest echelons of
authoritarianism
power.
on one hand, and then we have revolution on the other, and both of these are sort of feeding into each other and provide no resolution or no kind of place where one could live.
I don't know if you would call it revolution, and that's the thing. I
Yeah.
think the Greys are more into the idea of something more revolutionary, or at least rapid evolution. But that
Hmm.
is, it's
Well, I meant that in the
decentralization
negative
of
sense.
power.
Like I meant that in the negative sense, like a revolution in the sense of just a blind kind of revolution without any kind of aim, or which tends to lead to more destruction, and tends to put more monsters in place where other ones were cut off, tends to have that kind of effect. Sorry, please continue.
No, no. I mean, I think that's a good point. The dynamics are so strange these days because a lot of time, what we're getting now is this message that we need equal and opposite power. We just need a
Mm-hmm.
countermarch through the institutions following Rudy Deutsch and Gramsci, right? And that countermarch through the institutions means we need to take the institutions back over and shove our version of the one true way down everyone else's throats,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And that really is counter to the spirit of decentralized innovation that the Greys represent. We are a neither nor tribe there. The gray
Mm-hmm.
robes trope, of course, is to really to formalize that. So if you appeal to the wisdom of Gandalf, as I was referring to earlier, it's like resist the temptation of the ring,
Yep.
or another way of putting it might be, or at least give everyone equally powerful rings,
That seems
right?
like a profoundly ethical stance. Whereas, which just seems kind of counterintuitive to how we think of libertarianism, or at least the tech people and what they're up to.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people who've gotten captured by the sort of technocratic thinking. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's like if you think about technology, especially that which comes out of Silicon Valley, as being a tool.
Yeah.
A knife is a tool. You can use a knife to cut your steak, or you can use a knife to stab your spouse, right?
Yeah.
So, how do we ethically use these tools? And I think that there are a lot of conversations about how technology can allow the rapid centralization of power and authority, where Silicon Valley, as it were, plays handmaiden to the powerful, or it can be a force of decentralization where power is more locally concentrated. There still might be, a condition we might call polycentrism, which is there is still loci of power
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
different places. But when you're closer to the action, it can be more participatory, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It gets to be a place where something more akin to democracy makes sense because you're not just crying your teardrop into the ocean of 350 million people, say, here in the United States, and expecting the tide to turn, because it never will.
Yeah.
Just probabilistically, your vote isn't going to change the outcome of an election. And it becomes this great illusion that allows the powerful to continue what they're doing. And that power really runs orthogonal to red and blue in terms of the power structure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that the Greys realize. And so you get this. Another example quickly is Uber. Some people don't like Uber. They think it's too corporate or whatever. But the idea behind Uber was that you could overturn this taxi medallion cartel by operating within a legal gray area through
Mm-hmm.
technological means that allowed
Mm-hmm.
people to safely hitch rides, which had been tabooized because it was dangerous. With Uber, it becomes less dangerous, and suddenly you have a distributed system that allows riders and drivers to be to coordinate with each other outside of the taxi medallion monopoly. That is the kind of thing that is the sort of subversive innovation that the Greys like. And so you get Uber coming up, you get the Bitcoin white paper in 2008. Uber comes online in 2012, I want to say. And you start to get this technological means of changing power dynamics where you can rapidly onboard constituency groups uh, in reverse from the problem of concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. The Greys emerge as a real force and they start to become self-conscious. Alexander helped them do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should talk a little bit more about your course and you know, in your introduction, you know, of course, a major word is decentral, and major idea here is decentralization,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then you have these concepts, which I like: mystery, mission, morality, means, and meaning, um, as being, let's say, principal axioms, you know, that you will be talking about, I guess, I suppose, in your course. Um, so perhaps we could go through those and discuss what you mean by that. I guess these are what are these five M's? What you would say are required, you know, to have this, I guess, more enlightened type of small community, you know, run by not by the ring, but by, you know, a bunch of cool hobbits. Or
Yeah, I would say these
is my
are
question clear?
yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good assessment. It's like these are the elements that any form of social organization are going to have growth and staying power.
Hmm.
You
Okay.
know, it's also you could consider these five as being there is a dearth of these dimensions in modern society. And we could talk about why that is the case. But it's like this is also marketing something missing.
Yeah.
You know, there's this term out there called, you know, that John Vervaeke uses called the meaning crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not wrong, particularly in contemporary times, you know, these modern times. Um,
Well, it's
there
interesting.
is an,
Sorry, I interrupted here, but I keep seeing people flip from being atheists to rediscovering some kind of religion. And if they don't flip, and if they remain kind of rationalists, they want to, like, it seems like they want to reinvent rationalism and include the things that religion provided. For example, mystery, you know, or morality, or, you know, meaning, all these things, you know, mission, right? Because if you don't have those things, um, you're just going to fall directly into nihilism and sort of shallow reductionist materialism. No.
I think that's right. I think that is in many respects my story. I wouldn't call myself just like um, a super theist. I would consider myself in some sense an agnostic. Because I think in some sense the journey is this admixture of rationality, faith, and imagination, all working in a kind of all vacillating, you know, that and in the course we'll sort of talk about that. It's not designed to make the atheist a theist. It is more a way of saying, let's use sort of gray robe dialectics to entertain the idea of God, what God might look like. Uh, and this is the reason, because there's an analogy here between the gray robes as a digital priesthood or fraternity, a global
Mm-hmm.
fraternity, and the Freemasons. And what I have seen is that the Freemasons were very successful at unifying diverse peoples from around the world under its auspices and its framework of esoterica, right? And I think that we need to rip them off to a very great degree so that the Jew, the Mohammedan, the Hindu, and the Christian and the materialist atheist can all lock arms in solidarity for the same mission.
Yeah, interesting. I'm very fond of the mystic Armenian. I don't know if I'd call him just a mystic, but Gurdjieff, and he, one of his missions was was kind of like reinvent the meaning or the notion of what God means. And I think maybe that notion evolves over time, right? Like what people in the Middle Age meant by God is not even what modern Christian might mean by God, or so. What do we mean by God, and what do we mean by, let's say, a priest, and all these things? If we're in a gray area, if we're in an in-between worlds area, if we're in a liminal area, perhaps these things are what they were are they're changing somewhat.
Yeah, I think I have this trope that I'll introduce in the course called the it works in a funny sort of yin yang fashion, and that is the fractal of unanswerable questions followed by the fractal of unquestionable answers. Okay, so it's this vacillating dance between dialectic and dogma. In other words, there needs to be something around which your order organizes, around which your order orders itself. And yet you don't ever want to stop the process of questioning, right? Questioning puts more hands on the elephant in this world. You're constantly, when you think about a fractal, and like a literal Mandelbrot fractal, where you can click down orders of magnitude into this spiraling array that has unique elements and new answers every time you click down, every time you zoom into it. Likewise, and yet you can sort of pull back and understand the fractal in its totality. Not in its totality, but more as a meta view, right? And this telescoping process that you can do with a fractal is similar to the way inquiry works. So it is this dance, this dialectic dance between, on the one hand, imagination and faith, right? Because you can't escape the value ladenness, the faith-based aspects of inquiry.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, the observational, the intuitive, the observational, the rationalistic, and so on. And this dance creates this unfolding. So what we get to is journey and process rather than destination and dogma. So the dogma is the journey. And that is sort of, so I kind of want to invite people into that process as dogma, if that makes sense. It's about being able to live in paradox.
So dogma means sort of an absolute statement, and the absolute statement is like the absolute statement is to not be captured by the end goal, and not give up questioning the journey, or something like that.
Exactly. Hegel liked this idea that there would be a process of, I think you call it sublation, whereupon,
which used to be synthesis, but now we call it sublation, right?
Yeah,
it used to be thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and now I guess the real word was sublation.
Yeah, and that was really this ultimate welling up. I forgot I speak German, but I forgot the German word. This upwelling character of sublation,
mhm.
that there would be this final ultimate state called the der absolute Geist, right? The absolute spirit.
Absolute spirit. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't see that as ever happening. The fractal always unfolds.
Hmm.
The dialectic. So our good buddy Alexander Bard calls it methodological Hegelianism, and I think
Yep.
that that's a beautiful way of putting it. We adopt the methodology, we shed ourselves of the absolutism, the end, the great end of
Yep.
sublation.
Yep.
And so we are always, and in every case, looking for stable equilibria. And this particular equilibrium I'm looking to bring the gray order into goes off in a different direction from possible other worlds that would go in the direction of radical centralization.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Um, there's a lot there. But I want to sort of return to the principles of the course. And
Okay.
so, why do we need, your first one you wrote, it was on the top of your list. Let's say it was mystery. So, mystery from fundamental questions to wide-eyed wonder is what you wrote. Um, I
Yeah.
guess that I mean, I'm always defending mysticism against rationalists because I don't think rationalists know how rational mysticism is, or how really deeply empirical these people were in the great mystics in looking at experience and seeing what it was. And but anyway, so what about mystery? What's the need for mystery?
With the gray order, as it were, it doesn't, maybe it's not as self-conscious, it's still in the gray tribe, but the people that I would like to help catalyze, or that I hope self-organize, never stop asking questions. They never stop seeking answers amid the mystery,
Yeah,
right? And there are aspects of life that once we start to hold things in paradox, once we start to realize and have peak experiences too. One thing that knocked me off of my atheist pedestal was my first experience with entheogens.
sure.
And I feel like a sad Western sack for admitting that on video, much less admitting it at all. But because I didn't do the work to get into this peak experience that practitioners in the East might have done. I took a drug.
Yeah,
That being said, it happened, and it it prompted me to see the world in many different ways and to feel the, as William James would put it, the ineffable, to sense the ineffable and the noetic. And
yeah,
so it's not just the cognitive mysteries that I'm talking about. What someone like a Niels Bohr or an Einstein would have discovered as scientist, that there's still mysteries the further down you go into inquiry, scientific inquiry,
yeah,
but also the realms of imagination and the point and purpose of non-reductivism in mythos and in tropes like you refer to that are ancient, like the Red Goddess.
yeah,
How questions impel us. The Red Goddess opens her legs, and I don't want to abuse it, your metaphor, but opens her legs to answers. And and together the question and answer beget more questions and answers
yeah,
on
yeah,
into infinity. And this process can be ritualized. It makes us better intellectuals. but it also helps us develop spiritually in some sense.
Yeah.
So that pouring ourselves into the mystery has got to be a part of any order like this. And you got to know that the esoteric practices of the Freemasons are one of the big things that kept people coming back for more for nearly 1,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think the sexual metaphor is appropriate because it's about creation and the mystery of creation, and the fact that there is an opening, and then there's a penetration of that mystery, and there's always that going on, and and then the micro and the macro macro level. So I would say yes, for sure. And that's always there in religion, that's always there in mysticism. It's just it's often, I was looking into like some of the mythology of the red goddess, and I find that in the West it's considered the whore of Babylon, right? It's a very negative, it's a very negative image, and I think that is fear based, because I think yes, she creates and destroys, and there's a fierce aspect to that part of like the feminine mythos, but on the other hand, without that, you just have dry intellectualism on some level.
Oh, exactly. And this is my diagnosis of the gray tribe right now. And I
Mm-hmm.
think some of our friends agree, and that
Yeah.
is that it's too autistic. And that is not
Mm-hmm.
meant to disparage anyone who's, you know, neurodivergent, but rather a way of saying that it is a movement that is all about techie tech and making money, but it's not really about the richness and the passion.
Yeah.
It's all rather bloodless, but it
Yeah.
needs a beating heart. It needs a belief system that is deeper and wider than just crypto tokens and, you know, even the sort of rudimentary ideological checklists of libertarians, who I don't think get to count in the fullest picture of what it means to be a gray. It's about the alignment of, as Gurdjieff might appreciate, head, heart, and gut.
Yeah. 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 And the full on experience, the whole experience. He calls it the three brains, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so we have a tendency to separate, the mental from the emotional, or the affective, from the body. We separate in from the movements, and the work of Gurdjieff is not necessarily increasing the power of the three brains, but finding a way to have them work together, in
Mm-hmm.
relationship with each other.
And a
Yeah.
lot of the grays are all cognition, right?
Yeah. Yep.
They're computer science geeks, and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, but your movement, you can, if you wanted to reduce it to just left and right brain,
Yeah. They're all left
like
or
Ian
right
would.
brain people. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all left brain people. They don't have any right brain people. They need a corpus callosum.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To go
Mm-hmm.
back to Gurdjieff, they need the cognitive and the emotional. They need the visceral.
Yep.
And but visceral doesn't work alone either, in isolation, and certainly the emotional doesn't.
Yep.
That's just passion that burns out of control.
You got it.
So
Yep.
talking about that emotional regulation, and that alignment as a form of power, is not only informing and edifying our order, but impelling it along, is something I think is super important, because we're gonna need all types
Yep. Yep.
in the among the grays.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you said is good. I think people have strengths in either of these areas, and that's good. It's the detachment of the head from the body, or the head from the heart, or the heart. It's the detachment that's the problem. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and what you just said was interesting. Like I was just hearing, because I study, tantric Buddhism, and they talk about there's and the male essence is white. It's the white drop, and that's abstract. That's like lunar, and it's abstraction, right? And then the female essence is the red drop, and that is this fiery emotionality and intensity. And when the two want to meet each other, they need to meet each other, and they meet each other in the center and the heart is like an alchemical thing. So that the abstraction has to break down, and the fire burns up, and then something is, and it meets in the center, which would be the alchemical chamber, or the heart, or whatever. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what you were, in a way, what you were describing, um, in less
Yeah,
mythopoetic
it's
terms.
right. In fact, the mythopoetic as a vector of change, which we discuss in the means portion, which I think is maybe the penultimate, or let's see, mystery, mission, means. That's the third one.
No, morality is the third one. I'm just looking
Oh,
at it right now.
oh,
Yeah.
is it? Okay.
Morality means meaning. Yeah.
Yep. In the penultimate, the means, this idea of the mythopoetic as a vector of well, I call it the arcana of persuasion. In other
Mhm.
words, if we're committed to this idea of of this virtue of nonviolence, and I think we ought to be to a great degree. It's not to say that you should be a pacifist,
Yeah.
not at all, but rather that then you should really be persuasive. And so some of the things we're going to do are to talk about persuasive techniques,
Hmm.
how you can be a bit better at persuasion. And of course, writing code that people want to use is a form of persuasion. That is absolutely certain. It's very different from the communicative faculty, the kind that you and I are using right now. So
Right.
how to better bring the persuasive faculty and communication to bear.
Right. So all
Talking of
these sort
yeah.
of geekies, guys, engineers, like, and people like that, who don't necessarily have the highest communicable skills, but live in a land of imagination and high abstraction. And this could
Mhm.
could be helpful for them on some level.
Well, just as the kind of how it can be useful for people like dare I say you and I, well, yeah, for people like you and me to embrace a little bit of the savoir faire, right?
Yeah.
The let's get out of our heads for a little while, out of the abstract. We deal in abstractions too, but they tend to be philosophical
Yeah.
abstractions,
Yeah. Yeah.
or um, if it's the mythopoetic or the philosophical, the theoretical. These are all very important for the left brain person to be able to appreciate, but the reverse is also true. So
Hmm.
it's about that balance. And it's not to say that someone who's naturally disposed to being a tech geek is ever going to be a super poet
Yeah.
unless they were, because that's going against the grain to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's learning how to appreciate and embrace a little bit of that element, because it's how powerful it can be, and the reverse, the theoretical types, the poetic types, and so on, to be able to embrace the tech geeks. We all need to work together in tandem. So if you can't get head, heart, and gut aligned all the time within yourself, at the very least, you have to have those elements in your community to be the most powerful. We'll talk
Yeah.
about that too.
Yeah. That's interesting. Because, yeah, I wonder that also, it's not just an individualistic thing. It's like the head, heart, and the guts, or the engine room of a tribe or a community is also very important.
No doubt.
Mm. So what about the mission? Um,
Yeah.
what's the mission here? From
Man, I hate,
hierarchical authority to liberated networks. Okay.
yeah, I'm going to go ahead and sort of reveal the answer to that one and take away a little bit of the mystery. But forgive me. I know I'm talking to an audience composed of well, to a host who's Canadian originally, living in Europe, and to an audience that's composed of a lot of different Europeans and people from around the world. But to my mind, the answer is good old-fashioned American jingoism is the mission. And by that, I mean this term, the consent of the governed, right? The consent of the governed comes from the American Declaration of Independence. So that's going to sound like rah-rah patriotism. Oh, after all, this guy's a conservative after all. But no, um, it's really, it is really thinking of the old Whigs, right? The idea that it is a revolutionary form of liberalism that even the Burkeans and the Lockeans would be suspicious of.
Mhm. Now you're
That
in
Jefferson
territory that
embodied.
I don't know, so you can unpack that some more. That would be great.
Sure. So
Mhm.
in the Anglo-American tradition of political philosophy, you have John Locke. John Locke's second treatise of government really set out a way of looking at staying within the framework of Thomas Hobbes, which was the idea of a Leviathan force that would keep people from fighting each other, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Essentially,
Yeah.
um, which tends to justify centralization. When you had the liberals, the French liberals, such as Montesquieu,
Mhm.
um, as well as the British liberals, such as David Hume and John Locke, these Enlightenment thinkers had this idea that you could introduce checks and balances, and that there would be a way to organize society in such a way that would retain the aspects of this Leviathan power that would bring people to heel who were getting out of line, essentially, um, and essentially maximize freedom to the point that it became a chaotic version of anarchy. Edmund Burke was a major proponent. He's a resolves the paradox of being a conservative liberal, if you like, because he didn't believe in you know, the what are the French Revolution he thought was a mistake, and so on. Whereas Jefferson really, you know, he was one of the instigators of the American Revolution and said so. And in the Declaration of Independence, the idea of the consent of the governed is a revolutionary concept. It says it really is about the attempt to bring about a consent-based order.
Mhm.
And a consent-based order, you can consent to join a niche or have an association with others who are, you can get yourself into a kibbutz, which is a completely communist state of affairs, right? Where wealth is redistributed and work is done equally, and the fruits
Mhm.
of the
Mhm.
work are taken by each equally. And a kibbutz is a very fine um, sub Dunbar generally order that you will find in Israel, for example,
Mhm. Mhm.
among the Israelis.
Yeah.
But
So consent of the government,
but
is
you
that, does that mean pure, sort of representative democracy?
No, that's the problem.
Okay, explain
Representative
this to me.
democracy, yeah. So the difference between a um, the radicalism of Jefferson is that no, it means that we can say this isn't working for us. We don't agree to this anymore. And it harkens to this idea of the sort of 19th century anarchists in the United States, which is this idea that you might want you of opt-in government.
Mhm.
Okay,
Opt-in government. Hmm.
kibbutz is something that you would opt into. It's
Yeah.
opt-in socialism. And the meta perspective I'm drawing from here is a more like opt-in liberalism. It is not an imposed order. It is an emergent order. But the framework, the set of protocols are such that you want people to be able to opt into the state of affairs.
Mhm.
Republicanism, yeah, democratic republic is just, like I said, vote and pray.
Vote and
And
pray.
that, you know, and hope that the people who represent you have your best interest at heart.
Yeah.
We've already talked about what kind of power slinks from the coital bed of mommy money and
Mhm.
papa power, right? Um, and that is something rather ugly and something we have called fascism in the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's weirdly neither left nor right. What the Greys are about is suspicion or skepticism of central power. And so the more opportunity you have to opt into different governance arrangements and have markets and markets and governments, assuming that a government is just some sort of ordering function that is enforceable,
Mhm.
you start to get some really interesting ideas. You start to get the idea that governance can be supplied by entrepreneurs and innovators, and open source law is possible.
Mhm. Okay.
And that is the
Okay.
kind of thinking that is at the guess the leading edge of gray thinking.
Right. So opting in to what? And of course, that would mean opting out as well, wouldn't it? Of you should have
Yeah,
the ability to opt out. you know.
that's right. That's right. It's funny that our friend Alexander Bard, who's such an interesting guy, and I encourage everybody to take his course at Parallax. He has this concept called exodology,
Yeah.
which harkens, of course, to Exodus. And Pharaoh, raised Moses in the court of Egypt of the Egyptians. And of course, after Moses had a conversation with a burning bush, decided it was time to take his people out of Egypt.
Yeah, the
And
exodology is the big opting out
it's the
of
big opting out.
the centralized principle, right?
Yeah. And
And
so for
authoritarianism and all that.
that's right. So we have this idea of exit, which has been celebrated annually at the Passover Seder for 3,000 plus years.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show you how powerful stories can be in leaching into our consciousness and in showing us the way, literatively and figuratively, to this idea, this algorithm of exit
Yeah.
over voice, say, where voice is like, I want to protest and I want to vote and I want to make my voice be heard. Well, that shit don't work anymore, particularly in this day and age. The
Yeah.
only people politicians listen to are the lobbyists who come into the lobby and the most powerful people of the deep state. And that triangulation is working against all of us.
Hmm.
At least that's what I believe. Now, I may sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist to many of your listeners, but I'd say a lot of people are opening their eyes now and seeing these dynamics. The gray tribe certainly has, and the gray robes are really going to try to understand the systems and processes by which these um, unholy alliances form and how they can be dissolved through
Okay.
technological means.
So the gray robes, then it's a metaphor, right? For
Yeah.
I guess for people who are priestly, like priestly castes, in the sense of of perhaps ethics and in the spirituality of the endeavor. Is that
Yes.
what the gray robes metaphor means?
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly right. I also would think yet another way to appeal to the idea of gray is to think about life is not so black and white, right? There's not this Manichaean good and evil, all light and all darkness. The gray robes respect, in some sense, the Nietzschean, beyond good and evil. Um, just as they might appreciate the passion, power, and poetry of the Red Goddess, as you put it. But they yet are not going to jettison the practice of the virtues. They're not going to say, we're going to get violent. We want to embrace nonviolence as a fundamental virtue and practice it in thought, word, and deed. And without such practice, we know we're going to be turned into that which we hate. But we don't want to get too Manichaean, which
Yeah, I think that's very good.
Manichaeism, Manichaeism tends to make people too dogmatic. So, yes, we have a mission. We have a set of moral precepts or practices, which in this course we call the virtues, because of that idea of practice, not just reflection.
Mm-hmm. So, when you talk about the virtues, are you drawing from any particular source, or are you just making them up as you go along? Like,
I'm kind of making them up. I
yeah,
mean, they're all well practiced, and I think they're timeless.
yeah.
But I'm certainly
Then you're not making them up.
no, I'm not making them up in the sense, but I'm not referring to like the Catholic dictionary of virtues.
Yeah, right. You're picking
Yeah,
and choosing from the, got it. Yeah,
the best of, yeah.
the best of. Okay. Okay. So we got through mission, and we're in morality was your next one. Mystery,
Yeah.
mission, morality, from
Hmm.
vicious nihilism to the active practice of virtue. So yeah, not vicious nihilism. I see a lot of vicious nihilism out there. I mean, it feels like it feels like everywhere I go, there's a atmosphere of vicious nihilism. I teach at a university. I can feel it in the staff room. I can see it on the metro. I can see it in all the institutions. Vicious nihilism. Yeah. And
Yeah,
then also I notice there's people are very virtuous, and there's a virtue that arises despite that. So how do we practice morality in the sense you mean here?
the idea I will appeal to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali for a
Oh,
moment.
great. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go east, because it hit me like a ton of bricks one day that I was sort of dancing around this thought and started to read the translations of Patanjali um, in the Yoga Sutras, and the yamas versus the niyamas are what I'm talking about in particular. The first three, as it happens, appear in ours with anglicized, of course, but there is ahimsa, which is the active
Mhm.
practice of nonviolence. Okay.
With Gandhi
Yeah.
popularized.
And to great success with the bringing down of the British Raj. He called it satyagraha,
Yep.
which was
Truth, power.
the active practice of ahimsa. That is powerful shit. We don't have to go out with our muskets. We are living in a different age. Now,
Mm.
the day may come when we have to take up arms. So I do think we have to be warrior monks.
Yep.
But our first battles are going to be um, uh, satyagraha, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we need to train ourselves. And this is really what's so interesting about the practice of the active practice of virtues. It is not passive reflection. In the West, we tend to think of ethics as something I learned in college and then I can just reflect on, or they taught me that in Sunday school when I was a kid, or whatever. Right? Excuse my southernness, but that happens a lot around here. And the practice of moral practice through the exercise of the virtues is really like training like anything else. You have to train like you would train on piano or yoga or karate or whatever your art or science
Yes.
is.
Yes.
You have to put in your 10,000 hours. And in fact, with this, you have to put in more.
Yeah.
So the active practice of ahimsa in thought, word, and deed is going to make us better practitioners of satyagraha. So that's number one. The second is, and this is a sort of a is satya. Satya being our connection with truth within ourselves, being true to ourselves, and being and living in truth.
Mm-hmm.
So to anglicize it and westernize it, I would call it integrity, and all of that integrity embodies, right?
Mm.
Knowing ourselves in truth and being in right relation to other people truthfully,
Mm-hmm. You
honoring
said
our
integrity
commitments and
in
so on.
bodies. Why did you say that?
Well, it this is the difference between the Western and the Eastern conception that I think is so
Yeah.
important, is this embodiment, this active practice. We're not just ratiocination machines. We are living beings. And if we don't exude this in the world through our practice, where it ripples out and affects other people in positive ways, then we are merely monks. We are not warrior monks. We are not practitioners. So it's what good am I up in an ivory tower or on a mountain, right? In my monastery praying. I need to come out of the monastery and affect others, radiating that with that radiative force that is
Mm-hmm.
a force for good, right? And so think about the term integrity in English as it is applied to a building. It holds together. When multiple people practice integrity, society holds together better.
Yeah.
It has structural integrity or tensegrity.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
So this it is neither individualistic nor collectivist. It is both. It is interdependency. The practice of the virtues is not something that is just something that we reflect on or listen to on a podcast. It is something we have to take back into the world and think about and act upon every single day. And then the third one that we would find is there's asteya, which is non-stealing, and I bundle that one into ahimsa. Um, but
Yeah,
there's
that makes me think
compassion.
of, and sorry to interrupt again, but
Yeah,
the last one, non-stealing, makes me think of vampirism. In other words, stealing people's souls or stealing their energy or stealing their resources or
that's
because
right.
there's a lot of that goes on um on all levels and psychological, just politically, whatever. So I think that's very important. That's a very important
Right.
principle.
Yeah. And the thing about the thing about being an anti-authoritarian or against centralism,
Yeah.
you have to think about what you're for. If we are for a consent-based order, we have to be, what is the mission behind the mission? And that is happiness, harmony, and prosperity. That is self-organizing community, filled with love and mutual support and
Yeah.
mutual aid. And that requires active moral practice day in and day out. Active compassion.
Hmm.
Mutual aid is not about outsourcing your responsibility to your fellow man to distant capitals.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
about getting in there and looking someone in the face and saying, I'm gonna write you a check and help you out because I know your family's going through a tough time. Or to this other person saying, I am not going to write you a check. What you need is to put down the drugs or whatever and get your shit together and get a job. And right?
Yeah. Right.
And and that those filaments of community that are present when we have face-to-face interaction, when we meet each other.
That's the key.
um, it's the key. It's the key. You
Because
can't
if it's
outsource
not a
that.
face to face, we did a couple of courses on Ivan Illich, and that was his big thing. It's like when charity becomes an abstraction, and care becomes sort of a concept, becomes institutionalized, then people are not able to act that out, in a spontaneous manner in the moment, face to face, meeting somebody, you know, picking the Samaritan out of the ditch, not because of some kind of law or rule or because that was the thing to do in that particular moment. So in a way there is a dogma, and in a way there's something greater than greater than, I think I just heard that the Hasidic, the meaning of Hesed or Hasid in the Hasidic communities in Judaism means greater than the law, right?
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
so that's what, when I think
That,
of,
oh, thank you. I want to steal that. I want to steal that. Maybe your
yeah.
audience will forgive me from jotting that
No,
down.
Hesed means breaking boundaries. Actually, in the tree of life in the Kabbalah, you have the Gevurah and Hesed, and Gevurah is making boundaries, and Hesed is breaking boundaries. So there's this process that we have to do all the time, and
And
I
this
think
is
if we look at
really
morality in that way, it's much richer than thou shalt or thou shalt not or whatever, right?
that's the old and or we're gonna devise a trustless system that can't be gained with Bitcoin. Yes, great. Keep doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And at the same time, make yourself and your neighbor trustworthy. Because at the end of the day, not everything is a transaction,
yeah,
right?
it's very good.
There can be, there's a difference between the sacred and the profane, and maybe transaction belongs to the profane. But spiritual congress happens in person. It happens in an environment of trust, and trust must be earned, and trust must be the outgrowth of practice where
Mm-hmm.
integrity is at the center.
Very
This is
good.
the kind of stuff that the grays often just miss because they're off chasing tokens, cryptocurrency tokens, or they're off trying to devise some kind of system and code, or they're trying to come up with some super cool enterprise that's going to get them rich. But at the end of the day, so what? Like, I'm as capitalist as they come when it comes to, you know, tinkering and having the incentive to continue tinkering to create value for people. I'm
Mm-hmm.
all about that. Okay. And I hate to use the word capitalist because it has such baggage. I don't want to
Yeah.
chase anyone off who's a listener, but serving people through innovation and entrepreneurship. Let's call it entrepreneurial
Yeah.
markets. I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
okay with that. Okay.
Well, the
I
Japanese, somebody told me in Zen, I think it was DT Suzuki, that one of the reasons the Japanese were so successful in business is because they had a spirit of, not for myself. They had some word for it. I can't remember a Japanese word, like for the other person, not for me.
mm,
And that was how they became great entrepreneurs, not for myself.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's laser. There's this man who's been a mentor of mine in the entrepreneurial sense. I'm not much of an entrepreneur, but he sure did show me the way in this regard. Who said he said it doesn't matter how many cool and interesting ideas you have, Max. If you don't start from the perspective of the heart's desire of the person you're trying to serve and reverse engineer everything from that, you will absolutely fail.
Nice. Yeah.
And that can take on a spiritual dimension.
Well, it's not
It
just taking
seems,
on, it is the spiritual dimension, in a way, right?
yeah, it reveals the transactions can seem so bloodless and so selfish.
Yeah.
But if you think of it in terms of interdependency, if you think of it in terms even of sustainable interactions over time, where we are trying better to serve each other,
Yeah.
and as the Japanese, I'm curious to learn that word. That's really cool.
Or it's, you could also put
Um,
it in the Buber sense of I thou instead of I it, right? Treating a
mhm.
person as the sacred other.
Yeah, yeah. And realizing that there's mutual benefit and mutual gain ceases to be something so so base or so yeah, I don't know. It can, and we start to ascribe that sense of service to places where it's been tabooized, because this is how power justifies itself. No, we can't allow that because we need to make sure that this is on the up and up and okay. So we're going to provide X, like governance services,
Hmm.
right? That's not to say that you won't have corrupt entrepreneurs. There's a lot of them out there. Sociopaths are in every system, but this idea of mutualism,
Yeah.
whether it's mutual aid or mutual transaction, mutual benefit and transaction, is part and parcel, I think, to gray orthodoxy or doctrine, if you like.
So it's also beyond the zero sum equation, right?
Exactly.
And it's a mentality of abundance rather than, poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. So the means is the next one that's catching my eye here. From
Okay.
spiritual stasis to personal development. This is, yeah, I do kind of cringe a little bit at the personal development thing, but I'm sure you have a better and a more refined notion of what that means.
Well, shit, if it's making people cringe, maybe we ought to change the copy.
But making
um,
me cringe doesn't mean other people don't love that. But for the reasons we just spoke about, in this whole kind of personal development, trying to get ahead, it's kind of has a bit of a flavor of often has a bit of a flavor of individualism or something in the grossest American in the negative
oh
side of that.
yeah, I don't want it to sound like some
Yeah,
kind of life coach thing or business coach thing. No, no, no. Yeah, let's change that copy. No, what I really want to communicate with that is that there are other dimensions of development besides that.
yeah.
Um, oh, Alexander Bard's been on my mind a lot lately. Let's go back to his idea of the pillar saint and the boy pharaoh.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a great one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So I love this typology. The pillar saint is one who's all in their head. They're moralistic and intellectual, but they sit up in their ivory towers and they just want to they want to moralize from those great heights, that great realm called abstraction land,
yeah.
right? And the moralisms don't do anything but criticize or pronounce judgment. On the other hand, you have this character called the boy Pharaoh, who is really a warrior, is all brawn and no brains, wants to throw his weight around. It's not to mean that he's stupid or she's stupid. It just means that they're really about power for its own sake.
Yeah.
And they fancy that they can be Pharaoh by dint of that power, but they haven't grown at all spiritually, morally, or intellectually. They're just all about strategy for how to get power. They're Machiavellians in some sense. So so you have the boy pharaoh and the pillar saint, and when each is so underdeveloped, they can't grow up. The pillar saint is at these great heights but doesn't know how to embody in practice and to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And the boy pharaoh has no real moral compass or intellectual heft, so is just they form these weird alliances, but it's usually not to good ends.
Mm.
So the idea of personal moral development could be seen in multiple ways. It's really about don't be a pillar saint, which is probably most of the people who are going to be interested in this court are going to be pillar saints. They're going to be intellectuals who want to sit back and reflect on things. I'm so drawn to
We're
the
all
abstraction
yeah,
land.
yeah. Me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really drawn to it, but I know that I have to exert. In fact, I have this saying about physicalism, which we touch on in the mystery section. To exist is to exert.
Yeah.
It's almost like the pillar saints don't exist except in abstraction, so they don't exert.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the archetype of both
Yep.
is the Renaissance man or woman,
Yep.
right?
Even if
Who
one is, one is dominant in the other, still, if both are present, then you have a more full human being, right? So
exactly.
I think, like you, I'm a kind of a bookish guy who reads a lot, but I have to do very intense physical things all the time too, in order not just to stay there. Otherwise, it seems very necessary for me to practice embodiment in some kind of a way. Whereas I imagine the embodied types, and I used to actually coach people who are in the military and things like that, and these guys, are kind of like they need to have more ineffable experiences. They need to read. They need to kind of learn the mind a bit. So yeah, I think Alexander has a very good analysis of that. It's like he uses more vulgar terms like the guy who's just in his dick, right, and then the guy who's just in his head. So the dick guy needs to
Yeah, it's
learn the
like
head, and
the
the head guy needs to learn about his dick. So to speak.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. No, and it's beautiful, and I love how gauche she can be sometimes, but um, I have that particular taste, and that really, the means section is really about not development in the sense of we're going to help you find abundance, which is some, life coachy shit for we're going to teach you how to get rich.
Yeah.
It is more, it is more like, okay, what does it mean to develop spiritually? This is
Yeah.
not woo. There can be some woo elements, and we really get that over with in the mystery section.
Yeah.
But it's not woo woo. It's really like, what is the byproduct of these beautiful practices, and learning to think and feel in these different ways and align these modalities in ways that help us become more efficacious as gray robes, because we are outnumbered by people who want to subordinate us, who are fighting over the machinery of power. And so if we don't develop, so the social singularity is the trope. You mentioned the book in the beginning. I used for the lateralization of relationships to make the many more powerful with respect to the few. And heading towards that is in parallel with the technological singularity.
Mhm.
So the idea there is that, we're going to, when we lateralize our relationships, we have to collaborate. And our collaborations are going to create new forms of organization and new forms of order that make us stronger. But prior to that, innovation and entrepreneurship, we need that compass. We need that desire to peel open the mystery. We need that mission, which is a state of affairs we want to live in, behind which is the mission behind the mission, which is happiness, harmony, and prosperity. We need to be grounded in practices that help us become more well-rounded beings in head, heart, and gut. And so the totality of this is really a kind of both personal and social development as an order that will allow us to protect ourselves against this, what we might call the authoritarian or managerial state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm about to, can I make a pause here for a second?
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right.
I'll just.
I just got
So you were talking about, the dangers of the managerial class, and that's what I remember. The last thing before I had our break. Do you want to continue your
yeah,
thoughts there?
there is a, you know, if I have to tell this audience that there is a problem of corporate power uniting with state power in unhealthy ways, I probably don't have to do that.
Hmm.
But I will say that there is let's call it let's call it a dark dialectic at play here.
Yeah.
And we'll use Klaus Schwab as the exemplar of this. You know, he has this German accent and he talks like this, and he talks about how we're going to solve all the world's problems, and he uses terminology like collective agency. And what he means by collective
Oh fuck yeah.
agency, and look, I do believe that there is such a thing as collective intelligence and swarm intelligence, and the swarm can have capabilities, but he's not talking about swarm intelligence, nor is he talking about when he talks about collective agency, he is talking about, in some sense, a dialectic, a Hegelian conception that is at odds with what we're talking about. He's talking about the union of corporation and state,
Hmm.
that unholy alliance that allows the suppression of voices or the censorship of voices, for example, during the pandemic, when people were saying, whoa, 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 this probably came out of the lab. I know two people who were removed permanently from Facebook and only allowed back on, and they had to start over again with their pictures and everything. For
Mm-hmm.
example, just because they questioned the orthodoxy of the wet market, for example.
Well,
Now,
interesting. Yeah.
in the
Well, we were
last two
banned. I was
days,
banned from advertising on Facebook, and I still don't know why. And they still have responded to me, and it just makes absolutely no sense. And anyway, so I can.
well, and that's and as far as it goes, there's this trope. It's their company; they can do whatever they want. They're a
There's
private
nothing I
company.
can do about it
There's
except
nothing I
leave,
can do
maybe.
about it either,
Hmm.
except we want to increase our self-sovereignty,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And increasing our self-sovereignty, we want to be able to interact. We want to be able to talk to people, communicate with people, even if it's in a sort of quasi-broadcast form, without the intercession of a third party.
Yep. Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's important. Yeah. That's so important. Anyway, please continue. I have a few things to say about that. Please continue.
well,
Yeah.
and so just in terms of the censorship regime that was erected around the world, and that is particularly pronounced in this country right now, and this is of grave concern to a lot of people. COVID was the really started waking people up to this problem. And there is, but there are other forms of oppression that are tightening, that are a consequence not just of government power, but of corporate power, and especially that unholy alliance. We're seeing this around the world in WEF, World Bank, the central banking regime that is, supposed to be independent from politics, but is absolutely not. Where there are these wizards who control the money, and the value of money in many respects
Mhm.
is a form of central authority that leaves us completely helpless to them in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
So the idea that we might, even if you don't like Bitcoin, for example, the idea that we might innovate our way out of this state of affairs is important.
Yeah.
And so the vice is tightening with respect to one side of the vice is corporations, the other side of the vice is states, and they're getting tightening the people more and more.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking
Um,
about something.
yeah.
A certain individual we don't need to name was he just lost his clinical psychology license, and because he said a few things on Twitter, off the cuff,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then and I was thinking about that. I was thinking it's like, why would you want to why would you want to be accredited by an organization that is authoritarian like that? And why don't you just do your own thing, in a sense? Like, I mean, this is there's another guy I was listening to it does philosophical counseling, and it's like coaching and it's like therapy, and but it has another name. You just have to name it something else, and then you can do it, and it has no you can just do it without need for any kind of meritocracy, except for the your own merits and the feedback of the people who appreciate whatever you're doing.
That's
Anyway, I mean
great.
that's like I know it's just sorry. I just my thoughts are that if these organizations are so toxic and so woke and so politically correct and so so overbearing and bureaucratic and Stalinistic and all these sort of things, that but we do, the good thing is that we do have the possibility to create organizations like the Parallax and things like this. We don't give a fuck about that. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. I love it.
Yeah.
I love I love that general mean in the we both happen to be part of this little group on this little online group. I guess you'd call it a message board
Yeah, the legendary
called the
intellectual deep web, you mean?
yeah, the
Yeah.
intellectual deep
Hmm.
web, the part, a part of the dark renaissance.
Yes.
And I love that the, you know, there is definitely a heterodox community, but what's so important about that is we take each other to task. We we wrestle in the mud a bit. And
Yep.
yes, it's intellectual, but it's not just intellectual. It's also it can get emotionally charged, and that's okay. We're human beings. We fire off stuff towards each other, and sometimes it lands. Sometimes it causes me to reflect and change my mind. And I think
Yep.
that is an absolutely vital process. The fact that we're doing that with one another in a self-organized and deliberate way is so important to not
Yeah.
only in reflecting how much we care about discourse in this John Stuart Mill terms of radical toleration,
Yeah, and there's,
but all
you talked about
yeah,
ahimsa, but there's also a fight going on there often. But it's the right kind of fight because it's a fight over ideas. It's not a fight over persons, in a sense. I mean, not that,
right. Well, warrior monks have to train,
yeah, yeah. It's a training ground.
and
Yeah.
it's a training ground, right? I mean, there's not, I don't know. I mean, I think what it would mean to slit someone else's throat in discourse would be to censor them,
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
you know. So yeah, free speech is welcome in this environment, and we developed that culture, and I think it's great. I
Yeah.
wish I could spend more time in the mud with all of you guys. I have a lot of work to do, and I'm sure you do as well. But um, in any case, yes,
So meaning is the last one. Meaning.
yeah, meaning,
From isolation and anxiety to community and self-sovereignty. Yeah, isolation
yeah,
and anxiety. In other words, the meaning crisis writ large, people feeling fragmented, anxious, disconnected from each other, high levels of anxiety because of this, new social media technologies, et cetera, et cetera. And then community and self-sovereignty. What do you mean? What does that look like? You know, what does it mean and what does it look like?
I think I don't know if you've ever heard of the philosopher, and I come from the Anglo-American tradition, but all you intellectual deep web people have caused me to return to some of the continentals. But there's this French philosopher Jean Baudrillard,
Of course, yeah.
whose idea of the simulacrum, is front and center in our world. That we are completely living in the simulacrum, right?
Yeah.
Which is a way of confusing sort of the map with the territory. Our interactions are all digital. You see people sort of absorbed in their phones all the time.
Yep.
We see teenagers who, including my teen, whom I love very much,
Yep.
um, but he's suffered from depression and anxiety, and we both know that it's because he grew up online too much, grew up on his smartphone.
Yep.
And so, he's been taking steps to get away from his phone and to get away from the screens. And I've learned a really hard lesson for all my other kids. But suffice it to say, yes, we have to be a global digital priesthood, in the sense that why not avail ourselves of these tools?
Yeah.
But keep in mind, the Freemasons, they were able to maintain tremendous sort of doctrinal integrity around the world. That's not It's not to say there weren't schisms, but they had doctrinal integrity for what it meant to be a Mason, and the doctrine that you learn, and the initiation rites and all that stuff were passed down because of good protocols internal to the organization and the esoterica.
The need for good protocols. Yeah.
Yeah, and good protocols are designed to bring people together in mutuality.
Yep.
That community is a profound human need that I think we lack. And while I'm very much enjoying this conversation with you, I'd much rather we were in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, one day I hope that we can all don real gray robes,
Real, actual gray
real
robes.
gray ceremonial robes, and be with each other in the same time and place.
I used to practice Zen in the Korean tradition, and everybody wore big. In that tradition, they wear gray actual. So I've actually worn gray robes before, but in a literal sense. But anyway, you're talking about something else. But you are talking about moving from, let's say, the simulacrum into the real. I want to.
Well,
not
yes,
push
and
back,
so the
not just
community,
push back on you here a little bit,
sure.
We're about to launch our second iteration of Luke Beckney's course called The Hard Way, which is a Gurdjieffian course. And he did some experiments to see if you can transmit these Gurdjieffian principles, on Zoom, and had very positive, results. And so I think a lot of people say that they're frustrated with this, but maybe if we had the right protocols and we had a possibility of sort of, having this conversation, on a regular basis, and then meeting a couple times a year, that would be a beautiful thing. And I people like Alexander and others who I've engaged with a lot online, eventually we meet each other. Eventually there is a need to move into the real space and meet each other, in an embodied
yeah, it's a yes, and I'm not good. I mean, we're sitting here talking over Zoom, and I don't want to throw the baby out with the proverbial bathwater, but I do want to say that the digital cannot be a replacement for that which can be gained in person.
Oh no.
When people meet in hallowed halls, sing together, chant together, learn together, and are able to clasp hands, hug, that kind of stuff. There's something, and go through an initiation. I made a little funny metaphor about how this is an initiation on the gray robes, right?
Yep.
But eventually, this is a sort of a proto thing. These are the seeds of something, I'm hoping. But eventually, there's going to have to be a means of coming together in person and ritualizing that. Because if you don't have that, I think we stay in the simulacrum. We stay in abstraction land, and it won't become meaningful enough to have staying power.
Yeah. Well, in the Vajrayana tradition, they have these you do go through these initiations, and you can get the somebody might read a text and then you're allowed to practice this particular sadhana, or you know, but but it is exactly what you described. So you could do part of that online, like
Mm,
you could do the first couple steps of that, let's say, but you couldn't do the full initiation until you've actually, as you say, gone and met, the initiator and the group of, in a real place. So I
mm-hmm.
totally agree. But it is also very interesting how far you can go in creating relationships on Zoom. You can't go all the way, but you can exchange things very intensely with people, and you can create very strong networks. It would appear, globally, everywhere. It's a wild thing.
No, and we simply must do that. It'll accelerate the process.
Yeah.
I think about the way the Orthodox Church is organized, which is quite different from how the Catholic Church is organized, and it's rather decentralized
Yep.
compared to having a pope and the Vatican. And they have been able, through tradition and sort of reference to their doctrine, have this spreading activation network of churches around the world that are
Mm-hmm.
shockingly similar in the way they're they're done, and the way that the doctrine and the traditions are conveyed.
Yep.
Same with Jews. The Jewish diaspora is mighty impressive when it comes to, I mean, the way they're able to execute this.
Yeah, I think they call it conciliatory in the Orthodox tradition. The councils, like there's councils of elders that make sure that one guy doesn't go nuts, or so there's a council. One guy doesn't become a guru or something. But I think that's the way to do it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to rip them off, too. It's like you got to rip off the Freemasons. You've got to rip, they have the lodge system, and they
yeah.
have a Grand Lodge, but some people, if they don't want to obey the Grand Lodge, they don't have to. It's more of like, we really strongly, suggest you do, but
Hmm.
look, it's it's really about the communitarian aspect of this and the doctrinal aspect of this. Becoming more formalized with it is the point, because otherwise, a bunch of techno nerds coding is not enough.
Yeah.
Um, the Bitcoin white paper is just dripping with a worldview. I mean, people are like, "What? What are you talking about?" But if you look at the choices that that person makes, it's very anti-authoritarian. It's anti-corporate finance and it's anti-government,
Yep.
both.
Yep.
And it is it
Well,
is
this
such an
was like
interesting.
the big
Yeah.
pushback I gave you at the beginning. When we were working on this course, I said you have to have a legitimate authority, right? Not just be an anti-authoritarian, because I support being an anti-authoritarian if by authoritarian you're meaning people who are people who are tyrannical with their authority. But what about authority? Like somebody might ask, what's your authority, Max? You want to start this thing called the Gray Robes, and from what authority are you doing that? Are you doing that? And if that doesn't sound like a rude question.
No, it's a wonderful question. It is really me not wanting to be a pillar saint,
Uh huh.
right? As I feel I have felt before I even had the term for it, which I think is beautiful. I've always been rather pillar sainty, and in my outlook and in my orientation, but I knew I needed to do something that could actually you know, exert something in the world. And so I am I am trying to be a catalyst, a conduit for something that is already in motion. Who the
Hmm.
hell am I question is very important.
Yeah.
And I say I've written a couple of books. But the point is, as a decentralized movement, we need to coalesce around the mystery, the mission, the means, the meaning, and so on. I probably missed one in there.
Morality, the morality.
Morality, of course, that's one of the most important ones. If we
Yeah.
don't coalesce around those things, just as and we can have administrative councils and things like that, but planting the seed is really about making it possible for people to take up the mantle themselves.
Yeah.
It's like a candle's flame. If everybody's got a candle, it doesn't preclude, if I put my wick to yours, we can both have flame, right? It's not a zero sum thing. I'm not trying to be anything but a catalyst.
Yeah. So
And
so
that's
everybody
and
can
that's why I'm doing
relax.
this.
Max is not a guru. You're not starting a cult here.
No,
Um, uh,
I'm not
because
I don't have
actually one
that.
of the first comments we got when I was marketing your course on Facebook is like, "Oh, is Parallax starting a cult here?" But I guess this person doesn't understand that it's very serious and kind of ironic at the same time, the way you're presenting it. I think it is serious, and I think you are being audacious. Uh, but I think there's, it feels to me like there's a lot of intelligence and goodwill behind the whole project. So
Yeah, thank you. I hope so, and I hope it's perceived that way. It is really an invitation um for the saints to step off the pillar and embody themselves so that they can become force multipliers with each other.
great, and I think a lot of people want to do that. And if you want to do that, come and hang out with us. I will be a full participant, and we're going to all do this together. And I'm sure it's going to be quite an interesting ride. So Max, maybe we're winding down. We've gone through your the five M's, and maybe we're moving towards some kind of a conclusion. Is there anything you want to tell? Anything else that is on your mind and heart that you want to sort of transmit to people in
Well,
closing?
sure, I can offer I would love for people to find me on Substack. And I know that sounds awful cliche, but I think I can offer something for free. It doesn't have to be paid. Obviously, if you subscribe as a paid subscriber, that's wonderful. But you get two things out of that subscription. You get daily content along the lines of the things that we've been talking about, though perhaps with other themes involved. But you can also easily contact me. And I would be very keen to follow up with anybody who's interested in this course.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so we kill multiple birds with one stone if you subscribe to Substack.
Yeah, and yeah, it's quite a rich exploration. I can attest to that. In fact, that's why I reached out to you, because I got on your Substack. Um, and also, I should say that we're going to have a further conversation in a couple of weeks with Mr. Alexander Barr, a trialogue, and we really want to push the gray robes concept and your ideas here on Parallax. So it's been a big pleasure talking to you in depth, intellectually for the first time, and I hope we have further conversations.
Oh, likewise, Andrew. I've really I enjoyed myself today, and I look forward to more.